Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's CorTalent webinar, where we're going to be talking about planning for growth, how and when to add talent to your organization. We just let everyone that was in the lobby, in the waiting room, so to speak, into the main presenter area. We've got a couple of additional attendees trickling in that we'll let as they come in. We tend to get started about a minute or two past the top of the hour, just to make sure everyone gets the opportunity to start at the very beginning. Maybe we'll give it another 30 seconds or so. See some friendly, familiar names and some new names as well. If this is your first CorTalent webinar, welcome. Excited to have you here. If this is your fourth CorTalent webinar, you get a gold star. A virtual high five. Okay, DJ, should we get started?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so my name is Rittmaster. I lead our talent consulting practice for CorTalent. We have an esteemed guest with us today, Todd Johnson, who is our COO and Director of Recruiting here at CorTalent. So for me, it's a pleasure to have a co-facilitator, someone that I respect a lot in terms of their subject matter expertise and ability to lead and navigate these conversations around adding talent in your organization. I also just have to say, once we started marketing the fact that Todd was going to be a speaker, registration went way up. So we might have to see Todd again in a future CorTalent webinar. Just saying, right?
We'll see. We'll see.
You know, this is our fourth webinar this year. And it's just been an absolute blast sharing information with you on a quarterly basis. All of our webinars are really about helping you get the people part right. That's what we believe in here at CorTalent, is what we do for our clients on a day in, day out basis. And I think this webinar actually captures perfectly the two statements that you see on the screen. How do you make a good decision on hiring top talent into your company? And then what types of creative people strategies do you need to implement to achieve your business goals? How can you get the most out of the people in your organization? We're going to actually talk about those two things specifically. Now, I already introduced myself, at least at a high level. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Todd, anything you want to mention before we go ahead and get started?
No, just thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join Rick and I. And we're excited to walk you through the people plan and specifically how you go about adding talent to the back end.
Excellent, excellent. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping. You know, if you've been in these webinars previously, we want to keep it lively. We want to keep it engaging. So we're going to be sharing content with you throughout this hour to make sure that you have really good nuggets of information to take back to your workplaces. If you have a question, by all means, just ask it. So we'll be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar. We'll also have some interactive opportunities. We actually have a little bit of a quiz feature for you today. So that's new. If you've participated in past webinars, it's a new experience, which is kind of fun. So you're going to have fun. You're going to learn a lot. It's going to be a good conversation. But by all means, don't hesitate to raise your hand or ask if a question comes up. Now, in terms of just kind of getting us started, when we were brainstorming what we wanted to discuss at this quarterly webinar, it was really born out of this idea that a lot of the clients we work with, you know, they want to bring top talent into their organization. They know that they have a need. There's just a lot of hesitation or trepidation around how do we fill that gap? What does a good solution look like? And then how do we get from point A to point B? And the experience can sometimes feel a little bit like throwing a dart at a dartboard, right? Like I kind of know what the center of the bullseye is, but in terms of my ability to actually hit the center of the bullseye, it's up for grabs. There's a big question mark. And so we're going to talk through a process that we use with our clients, 4 specific steps that really can give a lot of confidence around knowing how and when to add talent and answer that question, who's the right person, right? Because I think that's kind of the end result that we want to get to. So just to get a little bit more clear in terms of our agenda, we'll talk through those 4 steps in pretty significant detail. We'll, throughout that time, highlight the practical actions that you can take. And so, the way that this usually goes is that as we walk through these 4 steps, you probably do some of the actions already, either intuitively or just because you're familiar with the best practice. But I'm willing to bet there's 1 or 2 things that either you haven't thought about before, or maybe you don't do very consistently. And those are the nuggets that really tend to move the needle as you go back to your roles, right? Or back to thinking about how to lead your organization more strategically. And then when you get it right, we've got a really nice client case study that we're going to highlight at the end of the session. It's going to talk about when you kind of do all these things in unison and you make these smart strategic decisions, what kind of impact does that have on your business? And so, hopefully you'll get a sense of how you can weave together these 4 steps to really help your business grow through your most valuable asset, which is your people. Now, every webinar, this has been consistent throughout the entire year, will be consistent moving forward. We provide some education, we provide some discussion, and then we always leave you with the sense of what is a commitment I can make to myself or to my team that's going to help me take advantage of this hour that I'm spending to gain new knowledge and insights. All right, if you participated in our last webinar, and I think, Todd, you did a nice job referencing this idea of a people plan. This was the sole focus of our last webinar. What are all the things that you as a business leader need to do in order to make sure that you have the talents and skills to execute on your business plan? And so we talked about these different areas of focus that fall into a people plan, things like hiring, developing your talent, having a strong culture and engaged employees, knowing about your talent, doing a talent assessment and succession planning. We're actually just going to spotlight 2 areas in today's webinar. And so what we're going to talk through is hiring and talent assessment and succession planning. And more specifically, how those things help you more confidently plan for growth. So how can you use talent assessments and succession planning to develop your current team and prepare for future roles? And then how can you hire strategically so that you can confidently add new members to your team? Now, as I mentioned in the initial agenda, those 2 areas of a people plan, they work together in these 4 steps. And so what we'll do is, for the first, I'd say 2/3 of the session, we'll talk through how these steps work together in unison. And then we'll highlight that case study and give you some opportunity to ask questions along the way. Okay, so the first step is to set clear growth goals. Now, want to be very clear, this step is probably where CorTalent has the least amount of involvement. This typically happens either with the business leader or with the business leader and their executive team. This is your business plan, right? This is how you're going to drive growth in your organization. This is how you're going to achieve whatever goals it is that you want to achieve. But your business plan, and we talked about this at length in our previous webinar, your business plan will inevitably bump into this question of what skills and abilities will I need to be successful, or what skills and abilities will our organization need to be successful? Not just about you as an individual, but really the collective team. Now, the takeaway from this slide, and one thing that we talk to our clients about on a consistent basis, is that the sooner you assess the skills that you're going to need, the more effective your plan will be to add talent. If you can give yourself a little bit of a runway, that really increases the options that you have as a business leader to make sure that you have those skills available when your business needs them. Now, let's talk through a specific example here. Oops, hit the wrong button. Let's talk about an example of adding a new service offering, okay? And so this is hypothetical, but based on actual conversations that we have with clients. So this business is, we don't have to be industry specific. They're going to offer new service. So they need process development, because there's going to be a lot more complexity, right? They've got multiple services now that the company is getting into, and so they need to be better coordinated in terms of how they manage their processes internally. They're going to need additional financial analysis, right? So they need to be able to prioritize where they're making investment in the business and making sure that those investments are generating the types of profits and margins that they want to see. Let's just assume it's a product-based company, and so there might be a greater emphasis on quality control because they're going to try and do more volume. And then, of course, as any company grows, but in this hypothetical situation, as this company grows, they're going to need more leadership capabilities, right? There's going to be more levels in the organization. New teams are going to be formed. Teams are going to grow in size. And so there just needs to be an upskill in terms of the capability that the leaders have within the company. So I share this example with you because we'll actually use it in a handful of different situations as we talk about these 4 steps. But this is a sort of a good real life example of the types of skills or the types of capabilities that might get highlighted as you start thinking about planning for business growth. Now, the second step is probably where we would get more directly involved in conversations with clients. To a certain extent, we would work through that translation process of growth goals into skills and capabilities to educate a people plan. But let's just pick it up where we're assessing our accountability chart. This is often the first place that we would sort of have some active conversations around a potential strategy with a client. We talked about accountability charts in the previous webinar just a little bit, and I think it's a good opportunity for us to expand on exactly what an accountability chart means. If you contrast an accountability chart with a traditional org chart, so an accountability, a traditional org chart will have, sort of one box for one role, and one person goes into that one role. This is sort of your dad's org structure, right? This is the traditional way of doing it. I think we're all very familiar and aligned in terms of the intent and the purpose of an org chart. An accountability chart is a nice evolution off of an org chart because it allows you, if you're reading the text on the screen, you can have roles and define who is responsible for those roles, but they can be sort of dispersed throughout the organization. And so it's less about one person in one seat, and it's more about what is the role or what is the nature of the position and who's going to fill that. Accountability charts work really, really well in high growth organizations where, if you've ever used the term people wear lots of hats, that's often a situation where an accountability chart will add a lot of value. Because you can assign, this person's in this role, but they also do this role over here. So let's talk about what that looks like in practicality. This is pulled off of Google. I'm not going to say that I made this. I just Googled this, but it does a nice example of highlighting how an accountability chart can help you think strategically about your talent in terms of who fits into these different roles. So let's talk about Robin specifically. So you'll notice that Robin has the task of doing social marketing. And so she sits in that seat, she leads that effort. But Robin is also the executive admin to the CEO. So what that tells us is that social marketing right now isn't a full-time position, and Robin has some skills that she can lend to that role. But she's also helping Dan, the CEO, out from an executive administration perspective. Robin also steps in and does a little bit of HR from time to time. So Robin is a very talented person. She's tasked with 3 different roles. And the advantage of an accountability chart is that it allows you to say, okay, HR isn't a full-time position right now, but we're going to have Robin step in, and Robin's going to lead some of the HR efforts and lead the HR processes. And then as we continue to grow and expand, we can have these sort of just-in-time or strategic conversations. Do we need to hire someone to be more full-time? Is Robin getting overloaded? Do we need to rework how the accountability chart looks? So the accountability chart, to summarize, answers these three questions really, really well. What new accountabilities will we need? It allows business owners to make a much more pragmatic decision around, is this a new role or an added responsibility? And then also, when will we need this capability? And so there's an element of timing, right? It's okay if it sits open for 6 months, but after 6 months, we're definitely going to need this. Todd, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you talk about accountability charts a lot. Is there anything you wanted to add to this specific part of the conversation?
No, well, I guess yes. As far as accountabilities go, when you're adding that talent, I think that last question is super important, and something that I'll illustrate later in the webinar is the when,
Yep.
right? But laying it out there at, in a 1, 3, 5 year sense of growth, but when is the right time to add that talent, or add it to, or for it to become a full-time person, where Robin can't sit in 3 buckets anymore because your organization's now 100 employees and she has to manage HR, completely aside from social marketing and the executive administrative duties. And so when is that timing appropriate to start looking to backfill those roles? As you look at the accountability chart, is super important.
Yep.
Because you don't want to be reactive to the point where Robin's stretched too thin and ultimately leaves the organization because she has too much on her plate.
That's very well said. And let's double click on the timing aspect using that example that we shared before. So if you remember, the example was adding a new service offering. The various accountabilities that we discussed to achieve that growth goal are listed sort of on the left-hand side of this table. Okay, so we've got the, managing complexity through process development, financial analysis, quality control, leadership capabilities. As Todd mentioned, that allows us to identify if this is a new role or an added responsibility. And then as business owners, we can make a more confident decision around when we're going to need this, right? What is the priority? And so if you just use this rubric, process documentation, this is something that we need pretty quickly, right? But it's an added responsibility. So internally, we probably need to figure out who we can assign with this accountability. Who is it internally already on our team that maybe either has an affinity or an established skill set, and we can slot them into that role or that position in the accountability chart. But from a financial analysis perspective, we're going to need that within the next 12 months. This is a new role. We don't have that skill set internally. We need to get this right in order to have confidence that we're growing in a way that's sustainable and profitable. We need to go external. We need to hire for that person. So when we talk about assessing your accountability chart, hopefully this example provides more clarity in terms of how that conversation progresses and gives you a lot of confidence as you're making decisions about your business. Now, in terms of us, what we have found works well as you're thinking about your accountability chart, it's just easier to start small. And so if you're kind of on the fence, should we hire someone externally or should we go with someone internally? Just start by adding responsibilities to somebody. That way there can be some initial learning and some initial experimentation that would educate, oh yeah, this person can do this for a while, or no, this is a lot harder than we thought it was going to be. We really do need to bring someone externally. So starting small, just again, it's kind of a nice little experiment that again gives you more confidence on your next steps. We often, this is something Mary Nutting, our CEO, says a lot, is be creative. That's the real advantage of an accountability chart, is that you can kind of break those standard job descriptions. If you just go to Indeed and you look at the highly cookie cutter job descriptions, it kind of pigeonholes yourself into a very specific skill set or a set of experiences, where in reality you can kind of pick and choose to curate a role that's going to be really custom to your organization. And so creativity can go a long way. I'm going to talk through this in much greater detail in steps 3, but additional responsibilities are really, really enticing development opportunities for the right people. And so if you know someone's career aspirations, and they align with, the needs of your organization from a growth perspective, that's a magical recipe. Some really interesting and exciting things can happen when you partner up development and career aspirations with business needs. Um, and then we always like to see our clients using data. So what are the expected returns if you're going to bring someone new or open a new position? What is the cost if this continues to sit vacant? We were just working with a client where they were working on getting up a line of business, and many of their competitors were developing a similar line of business. And so they're trying to fill a leadership role, and the CEO knew the longer that leadership role went vacant, the more time it gave his competitors to build up that service offering in a spot where it was going to be harder for his organization to get back into the conversation. And so there was a huge need to get that role filled quickly. But TJ, again, I'm going to kind of flip it over to you. When you encourage our clients to use data or to consider the ROI of new positions, how do you help them think about that aspect?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to if any of you are familiar with the manufacturing or production side of things, like Kaizen language, right? What is the role that's going to have the biggest impact and create the biggest return for you as an organization? And how do you prioritize that in terms of the openings that you have in front of you? Right. I think that's just important to consider as you start to play out what position to really focus in on, or adding responsibilities to existing roles. But Rick, one thing I was going to ask you, and maybe this is what you're going to address in step 3. So I apologize for getting ahead of ourselves, but when you're adding responsibilities or you're breaking job descriptions, how do you go about communicating that appropriately to the talent that you're moving these pieces around? Right?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's a couple of ways to answer that question. If it's a new role, if there's not a lot of precedence in the organization, then the type of employee that's willing to step into, a little bit of a ambiguous situation, exercise some creativity, that's going to be highly engaging for that individual. And so, if you've got someone that wants to chart their own path, so to speak, make sure that you're communicating this opportunity. There's not a lot of precedence, right? And so we really want you to explore and develop what this new opportunity could present in terms of the organization. And then if it's a situation where you're being creative because you're kind of like smushing together different roles, and you're leveraging the full opportunity that an accountability chart provides, make sure that you're highlighting the impact that individual has on the organization. One of the things, and this is true, as you mentioned, when you think about development, but one of the things we often see is that leaders treat development almost in the spirit of delegation, where they're like, well, this work just needs to get done and this person can do it. And so, but that loses sort of the unique nature of the experience, right? So you're getting to do these two different but really impactful things, and here's how you're making the organization better. It also loses the value in terms of building new skills. And so, being creative is great, but it also requires a little bit more managerial skill sets and more leadership, because you don't want the richness of the experience to get lost in translation.
No doubt.
It's a great question. Todd goes by TJ. I think many of you know that, but not all of you, and so I will use them interchangeably. I saw the smile when I said TJ the first time. All right, so let's move on to step 3, assessing your talent. This is a bad joke. I'll just own that. I couldn't think of a different way to highlight the fact that from a leadership perspective, when you're assessing your talent, the critical path is to know what your employees' aspirations are. And so, we'll talk through the entirety of what it means to assess your talent, but as business leaders, we really need to treat that as the starting point. And this will become clear as we get a little bit deeper into this step, but we can have a really great employee that we think is going to be the next whatever VP of, whatever function you want to choose. That employee is perfectly content doing what they're doing for the next 5 or 6 years. And so they're not going to want that promotion. And as strange as that seems to you, those employees exist and they're really good at what they do. They're not looking for anything more. And so, as strange as it might seem, when you're assessing your talent, we really encourage our leaders to just start by knowing and understanding what their career aspirations are so that you can mold how you develop that talent in a strategic fashion that aligns with their aspirations. Now, let's talk about the full spectrum of how you assess your current employees. Um, as business leaders, when we think about assessing current employees, just the way that most organizations do it, it's really about understanding their current performance. And there's this sort of straight line of assumptions that occur where it's if they're good at X, they're probably going to be good at Y, or at the minimum, they're going to be doing good at X+1 or X+2, taking on a little bit more. That's not always the case. Additionally, potential has several different variations or fashions. And so when we tell business leaders, we really want you to consider their future potential, it's healthy to know, what does that mean? Is this person really committed to their craft? Are they an IT professional who really wants to advance their expertise, innovate in the way that they facilitate their skill sets? Or do they have a more broad-based set of aspirations? Are they, one that wants to just develop a set of executive leadership skills? So it doesn't matter if they're managing marketing or if they're leading operations, they just want to be in a leadership position. So, current performance is an incredibly important part of assessing your employees, but knowing what their potential is and the direction of their potential is important. And then again, as I referenced on the previous slide, you have to know what their passions and interests are. You have to know what their aspirations are, because that's really going to provide the conduit that allows you as a leader to maximize both their current performance and future potential. Yeah.
Quick question on that. Oftentimes, what if their aspirations, unfortunately, don't align with their current performance or their future potential as you're going through this assessment? So say you have an individual that's a VP of sales and marketing, and they see themselves in the president's seat, but there's really some disconnect on that passion and interest from the current president or the current owner to get that person to that seat. How do you handle that situation?
Yeah, it's a great question, Todd. So,
because they're really good. Let's just say they're really good at that VP of sales and marketing role.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So one of the things that all four of these steps do really well is they take what is maybe assumed or unspoken or even ambiguous, right? Unclear. And they bring it into the light, so to speak. And they sort of put a spotlight on issues that either are going to enhance growth or limit growth. And so, it's a very positive and healthy outcome for a company to go through this process of assessing their talent, identifying that, this person is very, very talented. They are in the right seat. And we're not going to put an expectation on this individual that they can, get to that next level. And that VP to president, that one requires the most delicate uh, touch, so to speak, because there's only one president role often for many organizations. And so you really want to make sure you're getting that right. You don't want someone to feel like they deserve it, so to speak. And so with the situation that you just highlighted, Todd, it's very common that we go through this and it's like, you know what, and we'll talk about succession planning in just a second. You're not on the succession plan right now. And as leaders, you can say that with confidence. You can say, here's why, okay? We talked about it as a leadership team. Here's why. And then it's kind of in the employee's court, so to speak, right? So they can say, well, I haven't demonstrated these abilities, but I believe that I have it. And so, what are the experiences that I need? I'll go out and I'll get them. And I've seen some really cool things happen in that situation where they're kind of a diamond in the rough, so to speak. They believed in themselves and they were able to demonstrate that capability, but doing it knowing that they needed that experience, they needed to show those skills, and that people needed to see them leveraging those skills. And so it is kind of a roundabout way to answer your question, but it inevitably leads to a healthier outcome because the person is more aligned in terms of their opportunity and their potential, and then the business is more aligned in terms of what they're really looking for. um, the thing that it does, that this process does really well, is that person who everybody kind of looks to as the next successor and just assumes that that person is the next successor, and maybe they're the right person but maybe they're not. And so you want to make that decision based on a clear process and more pragmatic set of discussions. um Okay, I see Kathy's typing a question, so I'll anxiously await Kathy's question. While we're waiting for Kathy to hit enter, I'm just going to go back to the slide. So when we take someone's current performance and future potential, and then we layer in their career aspirations, we can slot them into these really 4 different categories. And so this is kind of the net result of these categories, is that when you go through this process as a leadership team, you have a clear understanding of who your top talent is, who your growth talent is, who your expert talent is, core talent. And then if there is anyone that's either in the wrong seat, or their skills just aren't a good match with their current role, they would get mismatched. Okay. Now, I could talk about these different talent categories for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. I absolutely love this stuff. You don't have that much time. I'm going to bet you don't have as much interest in it as I do. So I will give you a very brief definition of what these talent categories measure. So top talent is it's the best talent internally and externally. So they are ready for more. They can basically move into any role and be successful. They are your future of your organization. Growth talent, similar in the sense that they have a tremendous amount of capability, but likely need more vetting through the form of additional experience, additional responsibilities. So they're on the right path, so to speak. They're just not as established as top talent. Expert talent is the individual who is, highly creative, highly thoughtful, but deeply committed to their technical skill set. So they're going to want to remain in their lane, so to speak. You're not going to want to pull them out of their role or function, because that's who they are. They're really committed to that specific set of skills. Core talent is the person, and we got to change core because of the connection to our name, but they're the people that keep your lights on, right? You want them in that seat. You want to continue to develop them and invest in them because they're high performers. They're adding value to your organization, but you're not going to likely put them in a seat where they're getting a significant amount of additional responsibility. And I kind of talked through that mismatched talent already. So hopefully that role makes, or that's
Question for you.
Yeah.
A lot of times this is tied into, it should be tied into any generation, but it's been a lot of times tied into millennials, right?
Yeah.
In terms of having that clear path for growth.
Yeah.
And the expectations with the organization to lay that out for them. But what if you have a clear high performer or somebody that's in the top talent category, but you don't necessarily have a next role established for them?
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you work to retain that person?
Yeah, it's a great question, Todd. So it's typically what you do in those situations is you find like a really important business initiative, a meaningful, challenging goal, and you give it to that person. And I've even seen situations where executives will say, we have not been able to figure this out, go figure it out. And the people that tend to be in that top talent bucket that is like the most engaging thing you could possibly do for those individuals. And the really great part about that strategy is that every business owner has something that keeps them up at night where they don't have a good solution. And they're like, I don't have time to solve this. And so it's that perfect marriage between a little bit of untapped capacity within the organization and this really important business challenge that needs to be solved. And so it doesn't have to be a promotion per se. You want to make sure this person continues to stay in the organization. And so maybe you indicate, when the opportunity comes up, here's what we're thinking, but it doesn't have to be a promotion right away. It just has to be leveraging all of your talents and skills in a way that's an engaging for the person.
Perfect.
Good. Okay, Kathy, she read that hiring people measuring based on fit with corporate culture is outdated because it creates a situation where there's not diversity on opinions and stifles creative problem solving. Do you think corporate culture fit creates too much groupthink? So I certainly have an opinion on this. Because it's a hiring question, I want to at least give TJ an opportunity to respond first. TJ, do you have a thought on that?
Not really. I'd defer to you on that one.
Sure. Yeah. So what I always like to say to this question, it's a great question, Kathy. You want to hire for the culture that you want, not necessarily the culture that you have. And so that's a recognition that culture is an ever evolving thing, right? And so there are, even right now, just where you are today with your current culture, there are probably things that you're really, really proud of, and probably aspects where you're like, I wish we could tinker with this a little bit. And so I love the pull in around groupthink, because groupthink is real. If you continue to draw from the same well, so to speak, around talent and background and skill sets, you're going to get more of like what you already have. In some regards, that's good, right? You don't want to flex on things like integrity or, empathy or, commitment to your clients or customers. But there's likely elements there. You want to diversify the skill sets. You want to diversify the backgrounds that you're drawing from. You want to diversify what you deem as the culture fit, so that you're making sure that you're growing in a way that's healthy and sustainable for your business. So hopefully that was a good answer. It was kind of we haven't gotten to hiring yet, so you're jumping the gun a little bit, Kathy, but I know that's standard for you based on some of the conversations that we've had in the past. Okay, so let's get back to assessing talent. Let's talk through a hypothetical situation. So what does this look like in practice, right? We've got these categories that we can use to think more strategically about our talent, which is going to help educate how we develop and invest in them. Well, the way that talent assessment works is that the manager of the employee will actually provide an initial assessment. And so this is a process that I've helped many executive teams through in the past. And then the executive team will get together and they'll say, well, okay, we're going to talk through this list of employees. And so this would be an example of an initial assessment. So Shauna Johnson is the director of operations. The manager would present Shauna and would say, okay, Shauna, current performance very strong. She's done things really, really well, implemented processes that have reduced our production costs. Her team is really engaged. But in terms of her future potential, it's uncertain. She kind of struggles to get out of the day. She isn't strong at holding people accountable. And so like, how much more could she really grow? But we know, the manager knows, she wants to be the next COO. But she might not exactly know what that means. She might just be thinking, I'm good at this job, therefore I would be good at the next job. So I'm gonna just pause for a second here. In the chat, I'm curious to get your perspectives. Where would you place Shauna? What talent category would you use for Shauna? Would it be top, growth, expert, core, mismatch? not seeing a lot of activity in the chat here. Todd, where do you think Shauna should go?
I believe she's in either expert or core.
Expert core. That's good. I like that. So here's how the talent assessment works. You know, let's just say the manager says expert. I think she's really strong in operations, capable of more. But we've got some people saying core. So as a leadership team, you can align. You can say, okay, maybe she's more core. So that's going to influence how we invest in her. Probably not make her super high up on the succession planning list. But now there's this alignment at the leadership team level, and we can more confidently invest in this person and prepare our organization for those accountabilities that we know are going to be coming up in the future. So thank you to our participants who shared your perspective in the chat. Now, the last aspect of assessing your talent is to succession plan. And so what we like to see our clients do in their succession planning is really think about three important areas: technical skills, leadership skills, and then key relationships. And so, you know, thinking about the talent assessment, if you're going to assign someone to a succession plan, you want to make sure that they have the ability both in the technical skills area and the leadership skills area, and then start preparing and investing in those different skill sets. That is, I think, where most leaders tend to gravitate towards when you think about succession planning. We also like to pull in key relationships. And so, especially at the more senior levels of an organization, those relationships, both internal and external, can really determine the success of the individual. And so being proactive in terms of establishing those relationships makes it a much easier handoff from a succession planning perspective. This is another one of those areas. There's a lot of nuance to succession planning. It's a lot trickier than what we can capture on one slide. So we want to highlight and recognize succession planning as part of this process, but not spend too much time on it. Now, I do want to, we've got a quiz question that we're going to ask here, okay? It's about succession planning. The way that the quiz works, if you want to participate, you got to scan that QR code with your phone. And it'll ask you to join the quiz, so to speak. Okay? So once you join the quiz, I'll show the question. And I'll give you some, it'll actually show on your phone. Show the question, and then you'll have an opportunity to try it out for yourself.
We got 3 in there.
Got 3.
5. There we go.
5. I want to make sure everyone gets a chance here. Okay, we got some more. Okay. This is good. Got a good, okay, we've got a good group here. So I'm going to go ahead. You're going to have more questions to answer. So if you're not able to join, that's okay. Here's the question. What percentage of companies have a succession planning process for critical roles? What do you think? Is it 12, 23, or 35%? Got some people participating in chat too. That's nice.
I like it.
Good engagement. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to move forward. Majority, this is, we tricked you in this setup for this question. It's actually 35%. So as I was doing my prep for this, I was pleasantly surprised. I anchored you low, so I don't think anyone was expecting that it was going to be the higher number. What that tells me is that it's still only 1 out of 3 companies are doing it, and it's only for critical roles. And so, you know, there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity as it relates to succession planning. Companies, you know, you do the talent assessment so you know who your future leaders are. So we share this data point with you because it highlights the opportunity that doing all this work presents. Now, the last little bit of content that I'll share is, you know, once you've assessed your talent, that gives you a little bit more confidence on whether you should build your talent internally or buy the talent externally. And so when you're thinking about build versus buy, what we encourage our clients to consider is, how difficult are the skills to build, and then how urgently do you need them. And so if the skills are really difficult and you need them quickly, that's a pretty clear decision, right? If the skills are easy to understand, easy to build, and you're not necessarily overly urgent, that's a pretty easy decision as well. High urgency, low difficulty, low urgency, high difficulty, that's usually where you get more of a thoughtful strategic decision. So I'm going to turn it over to Todd in just a minute here. I want to round out our example of Shauna. So Shauna, whether she's core or whether she's expert, we still want to assign her some development. She has some opportunity to advance. At minimum, she's doing good things. So we're going to try and test her skills. And so, we've got some examples of here where we might develop some of her technical skill sets, develop some of her leadership skill sets and key relationships. And that'll give us a better understanding of where she fits within that succession plan. Now, what we talk about when we think about assessing talent, and Todd and I already discussed this kind of at a high level originally, or a handful of slides ago. Stretch assignments are great for all the reasons that I talked about previously. Increased responsibilities are really nice, especially from an accountability chart perspective. And then mentoring and coaching is just a high value, low cost opportunity to make sure that person is progressing in a healthy and sustainable way. So that's a deep dive on assess your talent, probably more than you thought you were going to get exposure to. I'm going to flip it over to Todd, and he's going to talk about how to add to your team.
So perfect transition. After you go through and assess your talent, is it now time to add to the team, right? You know it exists. You've gone through your accountability chart. But one of the first things here as you get into adding to your team and going through the talent assessment is what gaps exist in my current accountability chart. And then looking at that chart on the right there, are those gaps high impact and unique skills? It's just what Rick was just sharing, right? And if those are high impact, unique skills, how do we ensure that we plug those holes? And what is the timing of that to get the business that unique skill set in order for us to hit our growth targets and allow us to grow? So anytime you're looking to add to your team, I think it's important to ask yourself the 3 or the 4 questions posed there on the left. And then what does hiring success look like to round out adding to your team over a 6 to 12 month period? Do you have the proper onboarding plan? Do you have the proper time to train that individual? Do you have the proper development plans in place for them to become fully operational in that specific accountability, but also what Rick was talking about in terms of future accountabilities? If they're a high performer and have a lot of potential, what can you add to their plate? So a couple of examples in terms of clients that we've worked with that have gone through and tried to add to their team, and some that have been effective and some that have been ineffective. So recently, we worked with an organization, which was a nonprofit, who was looking to add a CEO, and the need was a successor due to that CEO's retirement. And what they found out in their anticipated outcome was to utilize an outside search firm to identify that outside talent. But what they found out over the course of a 6 to 12 month search is they had that talent right there under their nose in the COO level, at the COO level, to be promoted to CEO. So what they really missed out on was assessing their current talent. So they went through a retained search process. It actually wasn't with us, but they went through a retained search process, paid a few fees, right? And then found out, oh, wait, actually, our COO is actually capable of this role because that person is a perfect culture fit. They understand the uniqueness of the organization and how to represent the organization. And our current CEO does have some runway to train and develop that individual into the CEO role. Had they thought about those things previously, they really could have focused their search efforts that they spent 6 to 12 months in the market on that COO backfill. Because what they ended up identifying is they didn't have anybody on the team to jump into that COO role due to the uniqueness of the position. And so the cost effect there is time, right? And production, and long-term growth, and the ability to get that CEO into retirement quicker. And then from a success story perspective, going back to kind of the financial analyst that Rick had mentioned earlier, we worked with an IT-based organization who essentially puts hardware into businesses, into commercial spaces. Their need was that they were having issues with profitability tied to the inventory on hand in terms of product and work in progress that was going on out in the field. So they weren't profitable with the talent that was going out and installing, and they also had a ton of inventory on the back end, but they couldn't figure out the analysis behind that in order to, what's our proper inventory rate and what's our proper service rate in order to really grow those profits over time. And if corrected, that high impact, unique skill set, somebody that could come in and analyze those things, the inputs and outputs for that organization, would allow them to have more profit, but it would take an investment in bringing that hire on in the short term. So really, it was a high priority hire for the organization, and they knew that they didn't have the talent. It wasn't an accountability that they could assign to somebody else within the organization because everybody was working at full capacity within the organization. So they knew they had to go external to find that talent. So the anticipated outcome, like I said, was to invest in that external resource to better manage inventory as it relates to work in progress. And then the actual outcome was they leveraged an outside firm to identify that unique skill set and experience and made that short-term investment, which subsequently 12, 18, 24 months later led to higher profits because that individual came in with that unique skill set and allowed them to better manage inventory and put their service technicians to work in a greater capacity and more efficient capacity. So, a couple things to consider. We'll go through a list of things here in terms of when is it appropriate time to add. Again, going back to your growth initiatives, step one, like Rick had mentioned, what are the high impact roles in the organization that are open, which is step two. Keep going, Rick. What are the key accountabilities? I think this is super important, is what are those key, so taking in that high impact role, what are the key accountabilities that you want this person to be responsible for? And what are the outcomes of those accountabilities going to bring the organization? Job title from an outside perspective is super important to consider, right? In terms of what's the market bearing for a specific job title? What is the level of the organization? What is the level that individual is going to come in on? Is it director level? Is it management level? Is it independent contributor level? It's super important to consider job title. Job titles are all over the board these days, but what is it? How does it relate to your organization, your accountability chart, and then how are you going to market that to the outside candidate pool? And then timeline. So we want to be more anticipatory than reactionary, right? And so when you lay out that accountability chart and you lay out those needs, again, what does that timeline look like? Typically, if it's a high impact, unique skill set that you're looking for outside the firm that you don't have on the firm, it's going to take somewhere in between 3 to 6 months to fill that role if you're working with an external recruiting partner or even sourcing that role on your own. And then finding the talent. How are you going to go about that? Is it going to be leveraging job postings? Is it going to be leveraging an ATS? Is it going to be an external recruiting partner? Is it going to be an internal person that you're putting on that assignment? All of those things play back into timeline and overall impact. Again, something to consider there. Selection process and consistency of that selection process. This kind of goes back to Kathy, what your question entailed earlier, in terms of What are we really looking for to build from a cultural standpoint in the organization? How are we going to go about screening these candidates to ensure that they're the right fit for us at the right time in the right seat? And maybe it's creating scorecards. Maybe it's creating scorecards when it comes to interviewing, I should say. Maybe it's creating a robust interview template that you're using time and time again, because we don't want to create too many biases in our hiring practices. We want to be consistent with each and every candidate through the course of that selection process. And then adding and layering on assessments on top of that as a validating point to that ultimate hire that you're looking to bring on. And then lastly, are we ready for this person to jump into the seat? Do we have the training and onboarding in place that's going to allow this person to be successful and up and running over the course of the first 6 to 12 months from an outcome perspective? So I think if you consider these 8 things time and time again in terms of adding talent, you're going to get really good at layering that talent and experiencing that growth that you're striving for 12, 36 months, 5 years out. So here's an example of that inventory analyst position that many of you could take into consideration when adding a key role into your organization. So obviously the job title, we're very clear on the job title is an inventory analyst. What are those accountabilities? What is the unique skill set that we're looking for this person to have and bring to the organization? Something always important these days is location and whether or not they're going to be in the office or hybrid to take into consideration. That's what the candidate market is driving right now in terms of questions, right? It doesn't mean that if you're in the office 100% of the time, I'll be 100% honest from an expertise perspective. There's people out there that want to be in the office 100% of the time, and we can find them. But there's also a number of people that first question they ask is this a fully remote position? Is it hybrid? What does the culture of the organization look like? So something that you have to consider in 2022 into 2023 when adding headcount. Obviously, a lot of times things come down to budget and money in a lot of these scenarios. We've put some open source. So if you just type in inventory analyst in the Minneapolis market, we put some median comp ranges in there from open source data like Glassdoor, Salary, Indeed.com. One thing when you're creating that range to consider is those unique accountabilities and experience level that you're looking for. So while the open source data is great, we typically rely on some more scientific data that we actually purchase on an annual basis that allows us to layer in some of the elements of the job itself, seniority of position, years of experience, to really and truly focus in on that comp and what that is going to be, how that's going to be marketed to a potential candidate and to that potential candidate pool. And by way of conversation that we have with those candidates, we're always looking to consult with our clients on what is that appropriate comp fit for an organization. And then from an internal equity perspective, something that you always should consider is the need and the talent at hand first. How, again, going back to that impact of the position, impact on the organization. I'm not saying that that should trump what you're paying all the other directors, other VPs, but that need is super important to consider on the forefront. And then to compare similar levels, similar peers within the organization. And lastly, consider beyond year one compensation. Oftentimes we get tunnel vision on that immediate impact, but what are you going to have to pay that person year 2? Can you afford to pay that person year 2, year 3, and incentivize them for growth, going back to assessing our talent and ensuring that that person is going to be retained year 2, 3, 4, and beyond. And then lastly, again, this goes back to the onboarding piece, is really before you go out to hire, I think you should define what fully operational means. What is the realistic expectations for that new hire over the course of the first 6 to 12 months? What does that onboarding plan look like in terms of the success of the position, the success of the individual, And is it very clear for them coming into the organization what those expectations are and accountabilities are, and be able to provide support to that individual, coaching, feedback, regular touch bases, one-on-one meetings, is critical in the first 30, 60, 90 days. Actually critical through the life cycle of the, Rick would tell you, through the life cycle of the individual's employment with the organization. But it's super critical in the first 6 to 12 months. There's a statistic out there that people make a decision on their fit within the organization within the first 30 days. And I stand by that. And there's more movement happening in the market today than there ever has been from a candidate perspective. And in part, that is why. Is people fall short on onboarding, on expectations, on clarity of role. And give yourself a 6-month lead time, right? It takes 3 months to really hire, 3 months to onboard that person. Sometimes for key leadership positions, it takes 5 months to hire. Because again, you're trying to hire slow and make that right decision, even though it's critical for the organization, is going to have that long-term impact on your business from a growth perspective.
All right, I want to just recognize the fact that we're already 2 minutes past the top of the hour. So if you're hanging with us, thank you. We've kept you longer than we committed to. What we're going to do is, if you're willing to stick with us for a couple more minutes, we'll talk through the client case study because it's a pretty compelling example. And then we'll give you a chance to identify that one commitment, but we'll do it quickly because we know you're busy people. You got to get to more work. So client we were working with, they were at 50 million, wanted to get to 100 million. So the goal was 100 million in 5 years. They wanted to increase their profitability throughout that journey of growing their overall revenue. So how did CorTalent help this client achieve that outcome? We kind of did all of the small things that we talked about throughout this presentation. Todd and I advocated a lot, and when you can string a bunch of these actions together, good stuff starts to happen. So to give a little bit more specifics, we looked at accountability charts, talked about those accountability charts every year, talked about how we're going to budget for new hires, factoring in all the different things you need to think about. Worked really hard to create a good brand, right? So that people wanted to come work and they knew what to expect. Succession planning, made sure there was a good pipeline for people, especially those high-risk individuals, that top talent. You don't want to lose that talent. Instituted some leadership development, and then identified where fractional support would work, right? So they can kind of couch the investment that the organization needed to make. Well, what ended up happening? The organization, the client, was much more confident around their people decisions. And so that throwing a target at the bullseye, I think, Todd, you had that gold bullseye where it was right in the middle, or gold target. Yep. That's what this client experienced. They knew who to hire, when to hire, when it wasn't working out, and they maximize the value that each person provided for all of their different accountabilities. What was the impact? Well, they achieved their goal. They actually achieved their revenue goal earlier, and that allowed them to do an earlier round of strategic planning based on this growth. And so really was a very, very nice outcome for the client. So with that, maybe we'll end here. We shared a lot with you in the past 65 minutes. And so I'm willing to bet there was at least one thing that if you did it in your role or for your organizations, it would advance how you think about your talent. It would advance how you're planning to add talent to your organization. And so I want to just pause and say, make sure you hold that commitment with you so that you can carry it back to your role. As I like to say, once you know, you can't unknow, right? So it's kind of up to you now if you're going to take advantage of this insight. Now, from a consulting perspective, we love having these conversations. We literally get out of bed to have these kind of conversations. I think you know what we can do for you from a recruiting perspective. We just have such a strong reputation around that retained search. We provide exceptional project-based search services. And with that, I will say thank you. Todd, it was a pleasure.
Rick, likewise.
We hope you have a wonderful day.